Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Nice to see already quite a lot of people joining in. We will kick off officially in about 1 minute from now, as it typically takes a few minutes for people to find their way into one of those many platforms that we're using today. While we're waiting for more people to join, if everybody could be so kind and let me know or let us know with Jamie, Ginny, and myself, where are you dialing in from? I'm based in Finland, in Helsinki. Jamie, you are based today in
Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Ginny.
Well, I'm in Korea, but I normally based in Seoul, but now I'm based in Jeju Island.
Then we have one of our Culture Factor team members in Turku in Finland, about 300 kilometers left of me. Where is everybody else joining in from? Just feel free to type it in the chat. Canada, that is an early morning for you, Morgan. Thank you for getting up so early. Early-ish. Amsterdam, India. Wow. So we are spreading across many different time zones. Sweden, UK, Thailand. Okay, let's see if we can break our record. Our record is that we've had 43 countries joining in one particular webinar. I think at the moment we are going to be around 12, so we still got some making up to do. As it is now 2 past, I suggest that we get started. The webinar itself will take anywhere between 45 minutes to 1 hour. It is being recorded. You will get a copy of the recording and the slides that we're showing typically within 1 week after the webinar, so that in case we went a bit too fast or there's things that you want to double down on, you have that opportunity to dive a little bit deeper. My name is Egbert Schram. I'm the Group CEO at the Culture Factor Group, and it's my pleasure to act as your host for today's webinar. In about 10-15 minutes from now, I will be accompanied by Jamie and Ginny, who will then shortly introduce themselves at that point to talk about the topic that we are here for today. How do we get from cultural awareness to action? What are some of the blockers that cause us to get stuck? And yes, we are aware, but no, we're not really changing. What are some of the practices that can really help to unlock change? And is that change something that we need to initiate ourselves? Or can our leaders help us with this? Can our HR business partners help us with this? This is what we're going to zoom in on today. So without further ado, a little bit of background about the Culture Factor Group. We have been around for more than 40 years under different brand names. We changed to the Culture Factor Group brand roughly 2.5 years ago. And what we stand for is making cultural analytics come to life. So understand how group behavior impacts work life, how it impacts you as an individual. As we would basically call it, how to make culture tangible, how to quantify it. It's a word that a lot of people use, but what's really the meaning? And what's the practical application of it? That is what we are all about. Every single year, we support anywhere between 150 to 200 organizations. We collect data from roughly 300,000 people a year. So we have an enormous amount of data at hand to play with. And I say that with a twinkle in my eye because there's some super interesting stuff that you can do with this. And today will be a short intro into that. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive in terms of what is culture again, and why does it matter to be specific about what culture is, because it can be many things. Then we're going to dive for the biggest amount of time in our panel discussion with Jamie and Ginny, including public Q&A. So for a lot of you, you've already shared some questions up front, so we'll talk a bit about those questions. If during the presentation and or the discussion, other questions pop up, do feel free to just put them in the chat, and during the Q&A we'll try to answer as many questions as we can, either during the Q&A or then in a follow-up, for example, through our newsletter. The newsletter talks a lot about cultural quick wins, so in case you're not yet subscribed, do make sure to subscribe. So for our panel today, we were expecting one more panelist, Bas, to join us. Unfortunately, Bas was unavailable due to circumstances. So we will do that panel discussion with Jamie and Ginny, and we'll do the personal introduction when we get to the panel discussion. Culture, layers, onions. What happens when you cut through the core of an onion, I'm pretty sure all of us are aware, is that we become emotional, most of us anyways, because we start tearing. So at the deepest level of culture, we talk about values and beliefs, strong emotional preferences with regards to what we see happen and do around us. At the most outer layer, and this is something that often trips people up, there's the things we see, symbols. How often do we have meetings? What are the colors that we use, company colors? Or do we have a team logo? Do we have a slogan for a company? At the moment, the World Cup football is going on. What unites football fans? It's the love of the game. But what really unites them is the flag of their country or their team, the slogans, the players. Symbolisms. Even when we use the same symbols, our interpretation of the symbol can differ. So we always need to be mindful that what we see and the purpose behind what we see might not be the same. We can go one layer deeper. Heroes. Often case, we take for granted that this means leadership. But can people that are not leaders also be heroes? What does that say about our organizational culture, for example, if the people that are not leaders are showing behavior that examples corporate values? Is that even possible? Or do you need to have a VP title to be a hero? Then we talk about rituals. So it's one thing to have a meeting, but how do we have meetings? Does everybody get to say something, or is it the loudest person in the room that gets most of the time? Do we take notes? Do we follow up on notes? If we talk about making mistakes, do we celebrate mistakes? Do we learn from mistakes? If we talk about going out to networking events and learning from others and sharing those learnings, how do we ritualize behavior? So from a culture factor group's perspective, when we talk about culture, we talk about these dual lenses. There is what is being done, the practices, and there are the emotions connected to these practices. And why is this important? If we work in a way that feels good, but doesn't support our strategy, we're going to fail. On the other hand, if we work in a way that supports our strategy, but is not emotionally sustainable, we're also going to fail. So if you want to have a sustainable multicultural business, whether that is across borders or with multiple ethnicities within a border, the point is it always requires a mix of making sure that you work in a way that makes strategic sense and feels emotionally inclusive enough. That way you can be both effective and sustainable. And this is what leads us to the definition of culture. It's nothing more and nothing less than the programming of the human mind with which one group distinguishes itself from another group. So it's about group differences. The way we relate to our bosses, to our colleagues, the way we relate to compensation and benefits, the way we relate to reading and writing emails, and we'll do a short case in a moment, all of this codifies behavior. And if we want to get from awareness to action, we better make sure that that behavior is consistent. Why is consistency important? Because it creates predictability. And why is predictability important? Because if we build everything around personality, we have 8.5 billion variables. Every person is different, meaning not very predictable. Flip this pyramid of behavioral tendencies upside down, what do you get? An unstable pyramid. So when you know what unites people, irrespective of their national culture, meaning we need purpose, appreciation, and belonging, and you know the cultural elements that help to explain how these needs are expressed, behavior at group level becomes rather very predictable. That's why it is so important. If you talk about culture, national culture in particular, we look at 6 different emotional preferences where every country has found its own ways. And as an organization, you also choose your own emphasis. You choose how you deal with hierarchy. Do you want to have a top-down organization or a bottom-up, or do you want to have a mix? You choose, are we all about task execution, or do we also build strong collegial bonds? You choose, do we focus on action, speed, decisiveness, or do we choose to take good care of each other, slow the pace down, build consensus? You make choices, whether you want it or not. So being aware helps people to identify, okay, I feel that this organization is a bit more hierarchical. But the important question is, number one, do you need that? And number two, how does that connect to people's preferences? If people prefer hierarchy and you give hierarchy, well, that's a job well done. But if it's not the case, obviously it's going to be a problem. And for this, we have a little exercise before we get to our panel discussion. You are a boss person and you're going to email a team member because they're being late. I'm going to give you 2 emails. This is the first email and this is the second email. I'm going to give you a minute. So I'll be quiet for a minute to set expectations, to read both emails, and in the chat, indicate which of these 2 emails would you prefer to send/receive. Try to pick only one. So which of the emails would you prefer to either send and or receive? And now I'll be quiet for 1 minute. Put the answer in the chat. I'll give it another 10 seconds, and we already see not a lot of the diversity in the answers. We're getting a little bit. Thank you there for those of you picking answer A. You just took a little bit of time, a little bit of courage building. Can I answer this? Now, why is this not a very unfamiliar example? If you think about the world, we can basically look at emails from multiple perspectives. Number one, how do we start emails? Is the practice to start with hi, first name? Is the practice to start with dear? Clear difference with regards to hierarchical tonality and collegial affinity. There are cultures that don't even say hi. They would just start with Egbert. And I know I am Dutch and I am known to be rather direct, but for me, the first time I got an email that just said Egbert, my first reaction was, what did I do wrong? Now, that might say something about my personality, could be. But the point is, did any one of us really ever got email training? Email training? Yeah, that's the one thing that we use most when we are desk jockeys. When our job consists of sitting behind our desks and we communicate most using email, it's the one thing that we don't really get any guidance on. We talk about, do we get straight to the point? I want to flag 2 deadlines were missed, or do I build around it in the sense that, hey, I hope you're well, I'm reaching out regarding, already setting the stage for what comes next. Do we talk about clear accountability? Do we spell it out? Or do we leave it in between the lines? Do we talk about me and you, which are kind of 2 separate entities? Or are we talking about us and we? We together need to make sure that our project is successful. We together need to make sure that we stick to deadlines, as opposed to, hey, you're missing deadlines. And then do we actually close off with a concrete something? Or do we just leave it out in the middle, which can create psychological unsafety because, okay, what's the consequence now? Do I get punished? Does my pay get docked? Do I need to come for a visit to HR? Because we do so much of this, email communication, meeting behavior are two practices that set the tone for what's the type of culture like in the organization. Because if I'm very clear in my corporate positioning that we have a task-oriented, direct communication type of culture, email A is perfectly expectable. But if I talk about we are a warm, inclusive organization, oh, by the way, here's email A. We have a disconnect between that what we say and a disconnect between what is practiced. And this is again why it is so important to not just be aware of what is culture and what are cultural dynamics, but also how does it get to be lived in reality. And to Morgan, your question, can it be warm and direct? Not impossible, I would say. But in most cases, email, especially when it regards negatives context like delays, it's better to just pick up the phone and have a quick Teams call, because a face translates a lot more warmth than a cold email text can ever do. And most of the world is what we call collectivistic. So they are expecting the face part, not just the literal text on a piece of technology. Now, this gets us to our panel discussion. And for our panel discussion, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll come back with a short summary in about half an hour from now. But before I start coming up with questions and discussing with Jamie and Ginny about their experience, maybe Jamie and Ginny, if you could do a short introduction. Let's start with Jamie, if you could give us a short, who are you? Then we'll go to Ginny, and then we'll get started with the discussion.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie. I just realized how close our names are, Jamie, Ginny. So I'm the managing partner at the Culture Factor Malaysia. Spent the first half of my career in organizational change management execution. You know, what to change, how to change, basically executing someone else's strategy. And then the second half of my career is focused on the step before that, which is culture strategy, what we do here at the Culture Factor, looking at why we need to change, what we are trying to achieve, which involves looking at organization culture, the link between business strategy, and the interplay between organization culture and national culture.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. And then we go to Ginny. Not the same, almost, but...
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Ginny Son. I'm a Korean. I am the managing partner of the Culture Factor Group in Korea. I have about 27 years of HR leadership experience in multinational companies. And just to highlight one thing regarding the email example that Egbert shared. So as a Korean, I had an opportunity working in Norway for about 4 years. And then my experience about email from my team member, they actually said hi, but they didn't call my name in the email. And then they just went straight into sent me that file. And I took it very offensive on my day one, but I learned later that it's the way of respect others' time in Norwegian culture. So that was kind of very interesting experience. And I'm very happy to talk about the culture and national culture today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. So we have a really great mix here of experiences across different nationalities, different organizations, industries. One of the questions that was shared up front was what made culture a strategic topic in one of the organizations that you worked at. So I'll give one personal example of a client organization where the CEO of a stock exchange company, so they manage the stock exchange in that particular country, their payment conditions got changed. So half of her salary was related to cultural key performance indicators, such as retention figures, feelings of engagement, motivation, which was obviously a very strong statement that, okay, culture is important. Do you have similar examples or perhaps slightly less extreme examples that kind of gave a strong message that it's not enough to be aware, it's of strategic importance? Jamie, let's start with you and then let's go to Jenny.
So I actually have more extreme examples in a sense of one way, very one way, or the other. So I find that clients, culture becomes a strategic topic, number one, when it's a happy occasion. And by that, I mean, for example, expanding your operations into different regional markets, setting up centralized services, or say if a new CEO comes in and wants to reshape the organization. So those are happy occasions. And I've also had clients, it becomes a strategic topic when it's a really unhappy occasion. Safety issues, massive safety issues at very high risk industries. So ideally, do you want the topic to come up in a happy occasion, in a planned strategic occasion, rather than have it become a burning platform?
Yeah, that's actually that recalled one occasion where indeed a client had a factory burned down, and then that same factory burned down 2 years later, and then they realized, is there a cultural issue? Not a happy occasion. Ginny, in your experience, what has made the culture a strategic topic?
Well, I think my experience, I think we can start with how much percent of change initiative fails in the organization. It's very high, right? Like 75%. And we think about system change, like simple, just change the system. If you actually see as an example, system change is as a system change only. And I think there is no chance for culture to be engaged. But if you really think about what's the outcomes we really want to get and sustain, system change and what behavior we want to see, changed from people, and people topic comes in. So for me, it's about how we set the goals of the change. Is it installation goal, or is it about realization and sustainability? And then that actually about people topic, and when people topic engaged, then the culture is to be engaged there. So it's about the leaders, how far they see with the change and what they really want to achieve at the end.
Yeah, I think that nicely connects to a second question is, how do you make culture visible enough for leaders to really take it serious and not to take it as a one-off? Like, we've won a great award, best culture this, great culture that, but to really understand that, hey, systemically, we are walking the talk, we are leading in a way that's systemically aligned with the corporate culture that we need. What is your experience there, Ginny, if we continue on your end with this leadership reflection?
Yeah, I think this is quite heavy topic, actually. I think leaders' role is very, very important. And the thing is, leaders don't choose when they become the leader and not. Like today I'm tired, I'm not going to be a leader, and people are not going to watch me. But people are watching leaders every moment, every day. So what they do, walk the talk, and how they behave, that is influencing. So for me, how do you make them to activate it? Well, I think it's an ownership. So HR is not the owner of the culture change. Actually, leaders are the owners of the culture change, and it has to be on their objectives and performance, and consequence management also has to follow. For how they lead the change. So that
Yeah.
would be my Connor's perspective.
So that to really build in also into the way the leaders get evaluated, that they need to be consistent in the way they behave. It can't just be that, hey, my evaluation comes up next month. Now for 1 month, I'm going to be a really nice person. And then after the evaluation, I go back to being the jerk I was. Um, Jamie, in your experience, so I remember at some point we went through the executive match, which is a really nice example. It really has helped me as a CEO of the Culture Factor Group, is that every second to third year I go through the executive match to still kind of see, am I walking the talk? Luckily, I have been, more or less. But in your experience with that particular tool in relation to this leadership question. How do you see this? How do you see leaders walking the talk?
Mm. Yeah, so for those who don't know, Executive Match is our like leadership assessment tool that compares whether your behaviors are in line with the optimal organization culture. And so that allows leaders to have a very tangible, very objective discussion on things that they are directly involved with and relates directly to their job. So if you use a term like culture, it's very easy if, say, you're the head of IT, head of finance, head of sales, it's very easy to dismiss and say, culture is, in my peripheral, not really something to do with me. But if you talk about it in terms of are your operations process-oriented or goal-oriented, which way do you need to be? Or is the way you work, does it need to be more easygoing and flexible, or does it need to have stricter control? So when you introduce terminology like that, it makes it immediately relatable to the leadership team and to employees as well. So then they can affect more tangible changes in behavior rather than just saying, the culture here needs to change.
Yeah. So it basically goes back also, like if we talk about making it visible enough at a leadership level, it's about providing leaders with a language to understand, number one, what does our culture need to be? And number two, how does that relate to my personal behavior? I can give a very good personal example. So at some point, one of the outcomes was, because for me, it's important that we have an approachable culture. And I always thought I'm very approachable. And then the result came back is like, you're not approachable. I'm like, huh? What's this? Yeah, well, you're traveling all the time. Ah, so mentally, I stood for something that physically in my calendar, I had not blocked time for people to basically book meetings with me because I was traveling all the time. And I think that's was such a kind of like a reflective moment that it's not enough to be aware. I was aware, but it wasn't until I actually started using my calendar for people to book meetings with me or me booking meetings with people, either way, that it became an actionable behavior. Because too often I hear from leaders, yes, but I am available. Okay, but that means that you're waiting for people to come to you. And if we take some of the national culture knowledge, we know that most of the world is very hierarchical. And there is this fallacy bias, you could say, that in hierarchical cultures, the normal employee is like a sheep, waiting to be told what to do. If you talk about leadership accountability, Jamie, from your point of view, when you talk about the accountability for the normal workforce, also to help their leaders to be held to account, how do you see this interplay? Is it something that everything should just be built on the shoulders of leaders and the corporate culture is all around what leaders do and don't? Or is it also something that we can equip the normal workforce with?
Okay. So in a hierarchical culture, for sure, leader behavior, leader direction is very important. But don't mistake that to mean, like you say, that employees are just sheep, will just take direction, follow orders, have no mind of their own. That's really not the case. Middle management employees have a lot of ideas, a lot of initiative. But what they do need is sanction or like approval from management to say, great idea, I empower you, go ahead and do it, So there is a lot of upward pressure to change. And if you don't release that by empowering people, the change is just going to fail. So it's not just top down. There's a bottom up that you need to let happen as well.
Yeah. And I think this brings us, maybe Ginny, I'll ask that question from you, given that you've got experience between a very hierarchical culture, Korea, and a very non-hierarchical culture, Norway, which, as the people in Finland normally would joke, they have too much money, so work is not really that important anyway. How do you see this? How do you see this in such a, like, you could almost call it diametrically opposed workspace? How was this in your experience between the hierarchical Korea, the non-hierarchical Norwegians, and that collaboration with regards to leadership behavior. What are some of the experiences that you had there?
Well, yeah, it was a quite extreme journey for me, to lead a team in Norway as an Asian Korean. So maybe I started in Norway. My experience in Norway team, when you need to make a decision, then it looks like it's the most step is to open the door for every team member to share their concerns and thoughts. It does not mean that each thought needs to be accepted for the final decision, but just process-wise, it's very, very important. You miss the process and the engagement will not be there. So that's very important for people to speak up or share their thoughts, and also for them to listen to others. And then the decision is made, and it may not be the best option for everyone, but then once it's there and people execute. And execution is also very interesting. People often enjoy flexibility. There is a deadlines and roles and responsibility, but I have often my team member come and say, "Oh, I know my action by today, but I had actually different ideas. So I was working on that different idea. I don't have anything to share today." So there's a flexibility, but it has to be respecting the space of individual, and they actually make it happen at the end. So as a Korean, it was quite frustrating, but later I learned, that's a different way. Compared to that in Korea, and as Jamie mentioned, people easily think it's a hierarchical power distance culture, and people may be sitting down and waiting for leaders to make a decision for them. But I think there is a lot more deeper than that. I think people like to engage themselves in the process of decision making, but what they need isn't information. This is high uncertainty avoidance culture. People cannot make thoughts hard without knowing a bit more clearer picture. So as a leader, it's very important to fill people with the right the details of information as much as available. And it doesn't have to be like a one go and they share, this is what it is or what you think. It has to be agreed process, like meetings or information sharing or whatever. Once the process is set, and then information is shared along the way, and people feel comfortable, then they like to share concerns and thoughts. Otherwise, it's like clouds hanging in the sky. There is local expression. It's very difficult to grasp it. Right. So
It's a nice reflection that you have there in terms of like shaping that kind of psychological safety for people to participate. And I recall an instance whereby I'll again use a personal example. Somebody said, "Edward, I don't feel psychologically safe because you're asking me on the spot with regards to what I think." And I'm like, "Yes, because I want to be inclusive." Only then to be told, "Yes, but I need time to think about what I think. So when you ask me on the spot, you're putting me on the spot. So can we agree that on Thursday you would say, 'Hey, I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are on this. Let's talk about this on Monday.'" So we're kind of front loading people with an expectation that on Monday we talk. We can make it even more specific. We can say, let's on Monday reflect on the top 3 reasons why we should or should not do this. But the whole point is, at that point, there was the learning reflection that giving people a heads up helps them to kind of feel more prepared. And Jenny, to your point with regards to uncertainty avoidance, also be able to prepare. Now, there's a question here with regards to where does culture most clearly influence decisions? And Jenny, you just mentioned something with regards to information sharing. Jamie, in your experience in high risk organizations, high risk environments, to which extent do you feel that the way meetings are being held require people to prepare versus think on the spot? Do you see industrial differences between high risk environments and low risk environments?
Yeah, so this topic of meetings is a very tricky one, right? Because depending on the industry, depending on the culture, what is a meeting is very different. Are we here to brainstorm? Am I here because my boss has something to tell me? Am I expecting the meeting to give me feedback and challenges? Or are you just expected to hear me speak? So, it's really different by industry, by culture. So it is important, I think, as the meeting organizer, the team lead, to set that expectation up front. What is this for? Are we brainstorming? Are we locking down details? Are we doing something else? And that then gives permission, in a way, for the participants to act in an appropriate way. Do you expect me to talk or not, or just listen?
Yeah. So we're basically going to the ritualization of meeting behavior. I remember it's always a nice question from the topic of learning cultures, that everybody is aware that the learning culture can be useful as an organization. But then when people come into a workshop, you ask them at the end of the workshop, did you agree up front who's going to take notes of this workshop? Did you agree up front when are you going to evaluate together what the workshop brought you? And more often than not, people basically look at each other and they're like, no. So then two things happen. If nobody took notes, ear in, ear out. If everybody took notes, then potentially, if there's 25 people, you've spent the work time of 25 people, whereas it could have been done by one person. So there are really nice reflections there in terms of how do we ritualize these gatherings of people. I can see a hand up in the crowd, so please do make sure that you use, because of the amount of people, but please do share questions in the chat so that we can try to answer questions as they come down in the written chat. So please do use the chat for questions and or commenting there. We had another question that came in, and that question is regarding an actual change. What changed in practice once culture became something that you proactively managed? Jimmy, Janie, do you have a practical reflection on an organization where you worked at or with, where after the intervention or the realization that, hey, we need to do something, that something actively changed? I can give you one example. That's an internal example with our pay list. So my preference for assertiveness is 83. I'm rather ambitious. I'm not very patient. And I like to make decisions and move on. And my team is definitely, the pay listed team is the complete opposite. They like to discuss and explore. And I got so frustrated. And they got so frustrated. So we were all frustrated. So they basically came together because they like to talk, and they gave me feedback. Egbert, can you please be clear? When you ask us something, has it been something you already decided? So you just tell it to us, or are you actively open for yourself to change your mind pending a discussion? Just that little practice, whereby I, as the boss person, had to be mindful that, am I asking for a confirmation of something that I've already decided? Or am I actually asking for input? That changed a lot of our meeting dynamics. And yeah, I see the team loves that because, yes, we did actually change that. Thank you. Jenny, Jamie, any reflections similar?
Well, I think from my side, I would say when organization finally manages culture, not the other way around, people are a bit more relaxed than taking collaboration as a learning journey. It's not the opportunity for them to prove anymore. People can fail. We can fail together. We learn together, and they talk about, well, we tried this, and then it's a learning, and then they can do something better next time. When there is no shared culture enough, then people become quite tense, and then they have a pressure to prove their performance. And when there is a failure, there is not much conversation or discussion. to talk about lessons learned as a group. So I think there is a bit of a difference between the two.
Yeah, that's a nice reflection in terms of indeed, are we perfect or are we constantly evolving and learning from that what we do together? Jamie, from your point of view and experience, any reflections on this?
So I work with a lot of clients from, say, Anglo-Saxon countries that open up operations in Southeast Asia. And I think what I see has been the most frequent, effective, and easiest change is communication. There's a lot of strategy communication going on, a lot of all-employee town halls. And before talking about culture, these global town halls used to be communicated by the CEO, and then it would just be like, any questions? Anyone? And of course, there's no questions from the teams in Asia. So after some coaching, the way they handle this communication changed drastically. A lot more effort put into the meeting after the meeting, engagement by the local leaders. So follow-up, delivery of communication, and also the way they request for feedback changes. There's anonymization of feedback, say through chat, or grouping of feedback from different teams where they would collect it so no one has to stand up and say, this is my feedback. So a lot more effort has been put into the way they deliver feedback and the way they request for feedback. And that is, it's quite an easy, practical thing to do that changes the level of engagement quite a lot.
Yeah, so it literally creates what we would call the wow effect, ways of working. A bit more mindfulness in terms of the design, the interaction design. So thank you for sharing that. We have two questions from the audience, and maybe more coming up. So let's start with the first one. How do you manage culture of people in this, for example, case, Korean, Dutch, American, in corporate change? Do you just pick one country, culture specifics, and force everybody to use it, or what would you do? I'm gonna ask Ginny or Jamie who wishes to go first. As usual, of course, I can answer this. This is such a nice question to ask and to promote our analytics, because are we really our passport or not? Is maybe the first question to answer or to ask. Ginny, Jamie, would you like to jump on this, or otherwise just tell me to go at it?
Yeah, maybe just a small thing before two of you. I think this national culture is how we execute, how we make the organization culture resonated effectively in people in different countries. For example, when you say, let's say, communicate transparently, that's one of the corporate culture. What does that mean in Korea? What does that mean in Dutch, US, or Germany or Norway? It may be interpreted a different way, but then as long as people perceive in that country we are communicating transparently in their culture, that is actually how it's implemented. So it's not about German way of communication transparently. Corporate culture is let's communicate transparently, that people can see the transparency in the communication. What it means, how it does, has to be related with the national culture.
Yeah. Jamie, would you emphasize the same approach?
Yeah, so it really is a hybrid. So when a company starts expanding to other regions, naturally, the corporate culture is the culture of the country headquarters, right? That I think will always remain a core. But every time you enter a different region, localization needs to happen. So it's not a matter of forcing one culture or the other. It's agreeing on what core you want to keep and what is flexible according to the location of the regional office.
Yeah. I would take it one step further still, which is to my earlier comment, we are not necessarily our passport. And my passport is Dutch, my value profile is Irish Canadian. That means that I prefer to work in a little bit more fast-paced way, a little less in a consensus-driven way. And like myself, every one of us will have a slightly different value profile, but you don't know which until you've measured it. That's number one. And those are preferences. Then you can measure the reality of a team. I once had a payroll team of an American financial institution. None of them scored American. None of them. None of the 187 people working there. They all scored European, which explained one of the major clashes they had with their salespeople. They preferred structure and predictability. The salespeople obviously not. So the analytical part in this discussion is really important to really understand, even if people come from Korea, US, or the Netherlands in this particular question case, are they acting accordingly? Do they wish to act accordingly? What do they have in common? We all need to feel like we belong, like we're appreciated, and that we have a sense of purpose. We just express it in a different way. So when we talk about change, and the same goes to the second question in the chat regarding toxic cultures. We need to understand what is it that really that what we talk about. So to my example earlier, the lack of psychological safety by asking people on the spot, that was not toxicity. It was well meant, inclusive, but it resulted in a perception of psychological unsafety. So is toxicity, if that is a question, just a mismatch of expectations, which is a cultural awareness topic, which can then be adjusted by changing the way that we just discussed, preloading questions, asking people a couple of days in advance? Or is it active toxicity, really scapegoating people, which should never be accepted? There's only one recipe for that: fire them, period. But even maybe that is already too decisive, because that is a corporate culture that is built on decisiveness. Maybe we want to have empathy. Maybe we want to understand, why is somebody pushing people? Why is somebody trying to scapegoat people? Are they facing personal issues? Often bullies are getting bullied, so they need help. So these are then actions that have consequences for the type of corporate culture that you end up building. And that's what we said earlier. Every action, whether you are mindful to it or not, shapes a corporate culture. Therefore, it's so important to measure and understand these dynamics. Then we have a question here in the chat with regards to meetings, meetings at some point becoming routine. And they become boring and then they become routine. For some people, boring is good. No news is good news. And same is good. For other people, indeed, boring becomes routine. And then we try to kind of like do a little thing to spice it up a bit. I would say be mindful about the ritualization of meetings. So one of our internal practices is that we divide every quarter in 3 months, obviously. And every month we have a different meeting topic. So month 1, we talk about strategy. Month 2, we talk about targets. Month 3, we talk about how do we feel. That way, it doesn't become too boring, because there's always 2 months between a topic. So there's always something new that you can build in. So we have a quarterly ritual, a rhythm. Within each quarter, we just focus on a slightly different topic. So that way we can also have focus. Because if in the same meeting you need to talk about strategy, KPIs, and feelings, that's quite a bit. So there are ways in which you can design meetings to be routinely enough, but not become boring. I hope, Brown, in the meetings, that answered part of your reflection there with regards to meeting behaviors. Good. Being mindful of time. Before we part ways, I wanted to share 2 more things, and then let's see if we have a few more minutes for more questions. So I'll go back to sharing my screen. There we go. We talked a lot about meetings, and because they are an important ritual in corporate life, we have developed what we would call the cultural equivalent of plan, do, check, act. So the cultural equivalent we call DDEE. Agree how, where, when, and for how long people get to discuss. Is this face-to-face? Is this in a Teams channel, in a Slack channel? Is it 1 hour? Is it 1 week? Whatever amount of time it is. Then be clear on how and when you're going to decide, because that way you give people the opportunity to either participate in the decision making or to influence the decision making. But don't leave anything unambiguous about it, basically. Be clear on it. Then you got to get to action. So for those of us that live in the Nordics, we like to keep talking after decisions are being made. So this step is precisely to kind of counter that narrative. Sometime you got to move. But then you also need to build in an element of evaluation, because when you execute, new thoughts can pop up, and that might need you to change and pivot. If you haven't gotten an evaluation moment calendarized, typically people tend to forget. And then we keep busy executing, although we know it's no longer working. So we also need to have the time to reflect, adjust, pivot if and when necessary. Is this a 1 week time schedule, a 1 month time schedule? This can differ from topic to company to country. But the process itself, discuss, decide, execute, evaluate, repeat, is a way in a multicultural context in particular to avoid assumptions of, hey, are we actually working in the same way? Because it helps you to ritualize the interaction. Now, the slides will be shared, as will the recording, so I'll strongly advise take some time afterwards to dive deeper and reflect and try it out. Next time you have a meeting, agree, look, let's just chit chat. Let's talk for 20 minutes. Then we move, make a decision if the meeting was meant to make a decision. Because if it's a benchmarking or a brainstorming meeting, we might not even need to decide on anything. We just come together, have coffee, and talk, which is also okay if we know upfront that that was the goal. This was the one thing to share. Now, the other thing to share is we've spoken a lot about data. None of us is our passport yet collectively. We become our passport. An organization is not the country in which it was founded, because an organization has its own culture, influenced by, but not the same as, their own national culture, let alone if you are a multinational. So irrespective of the context, make sure that you are aware of how do you relate to other cultures as an individual. How does that look like at a team level? And how does that scale up to an organizational level? Now, to get you started with this, do feel free to reach out, book a personal meeting. We'll walk you through a personal demo so you can get a good taste of it. We have a special announcement that if you order a tier 1 subscription, basically the entry level, before the end of July, it's immediate 30% discount. If you are an educational facility or a registered NGO, you have a standard 30% discount, so that's 60% discount if you basically book an order before the end of July. Meetings to book demos, just send us an email and we'll set them up typically within 1 or 2 days. So these are 2 of the wrap-up points to our discussion today. So I'll stop sharing my screen again, and let's see if other questions still popped up, and then it is time to wrap it up for today. Jamie, Jenny, any reflections that you still wish to share with the audience on how to get from awareness to action? Anything we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, I guess the culture change, like the onion model you shared, we need a proper process to lead it effectively. And also, it's not just a one-time off project type of exercise. It's actually people having the accumulated experiences and they get to believe that the culture initiative from company is something worthwhile trying. And then there's no a plateau to declare this is it. So it actually continuous journey.
Yeah. Thank you. I definitely can vouch for that. Early success builds a muscle memory for, hey, we can do this. And not to shoot our consulting selves in our foot, it doesn't require on-site consultants 24/7 because most teams have the power and the capacity to change themselves, but what they lack is the data and the context. And that's basically where we as a Culture Factor group can provide that initial kind of launching pad to really become aware and then carry forward that change, build around positive self-reinforcement, small, incremental, consistent steps. Jamie, any final parting words on your end?
Yeah, so I would say don't be afraid to talk about culture.
Yeah.
It's okay to discuss differences and point out differences. Don't pretend that everyone is the same because we're not, as long as the conversation is held with a constructive intent.
Yeah. Difference is wonderful. I mean, I'm a forester. If every forest would be the same, they would all be dead with the first infectious disease. So diversity and differences are powerful because they make us stronger. And obviously that is what unites us being here today. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a blast. Thank you for your active questioning and engagement. Recording, as said, slides will come your way within now and give or take a week. Do feel free to connect with the three of us on LinkedIn. We're all active there. And until we speak again, I wish you a wonderful Tuesday. Cheers and goodbye.